everybody, today we look at landscapes and especially how to model landscapes. Target is that we are very quick to produce something like this here, a fully colored landscape that we can kind of export, that we can use as import for heightmaps, that we can use as basis for procedural content generation with a lot of masks detailing me where's water, where is flow and stuff like that. And the whole thing will be based on a template, so hopefully in 15 minutes we will have the full result like this here with a changed landscape. I use Gaea for that from Quadspinner, so go to quadspinner.com, download it, and you will be able to use the free community version. You can here compare what the community version actually can do. That is quite a lot. The only limitation is kind of export, but you can circumvent that easily with upscaling, and that is the current version 1, and current version or the version 2 will be released in July. I will then just update the template to use that. It's better and not very stable at the moment, but definitely something to look forward because it's a lot faster. So here on the website developerbastian.tech you see this landscape project. For example, we have here example landscapes like the Alps or some arid sea landscape or island fort and so on and so on. These are all landscapes that you will find on the Google Drive. You can download them, playing around and try to understand what these nodes are doing. We will go through the template today that is quite easy to understand and is your basis for all other things. In the series, we look at the height maps today. We look at the 3D map in Blender. We import real-world landscapes. We build a landscape material, and we use PCG to populate the whole thing. Here on the link, you see the Google project. You can just download it from here, for example, or use some scripting to mirror it to your local drive. I have one in the blog, actually, if you're interested. Other than that, for today, we look especially here at Quadspinner Gaea and how to produce landscapes using a template. Why Gaea? Though it's really easy to use. It has very powerful nodes. It's node-based like PCG is, so that's kind of similar. And it has this free community version, what is extremely nice to have. And that is really, really powerful. Here are links to the tool templates. I'm using Gaea 1 today. If you click on it, you actually see a zip file with a couple of things. Important for me is this .tor for version 1 or .terran for version 2. And that is the project that you use as a kind of template, save it under a different name, and that makes it easy for you to produce your own landscapes. Taking the zip file here, I extract it first into a folder. Just put it in here, it's rather small, and have my template.tor file here. And let's open Gaea that I installed and open that Tor file. And you will see exactly the landscape that we were looking at the beginning. You see a couple of nodes that are working, and you see that landscape that you can pull around. If you have strange mouse buttons, you can do that in the preferences. So what are we looking at here? Yeah, that is the web page, and we are looking mainly at the structure of the template with these tabs here. The tabs are Lithosphere, Hydrosphere, Biosphere, Export, and Color tab. What are these tabs doing and how to work with them? So your geometry is the lithosphere, so really producing the kind of mesh and height map that you want to use. Important is that you then export it and import that result again into the hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is everything water, so snow and rivers and stuff like that, and it will again export the things. We take then this export and put it into the biosphere, adding, for example, scrubs or trees or whatever it is, and again we are exporting it. And all these exports will then end up in height maps and masks for Unreal, for example. That means you can actually leave the whole template exactly as it is, only modifying here the geometry at the beginning. For example, taking your mountain and adding a new seed to it. And you will see that the mountain is dramatically changing actually. And then maybe taking a wizard that is simulating erosion and playing around with that. Because the wizard will simulate wind, water, erosion, and will kind of carve the landscape depending on the settings of the landscape, make it more realistic and produce things like flow information, for example, and edge information. So that's a very easy way for you to really model the landscapes. That is of course very primitive, just taking a mountain. You have a couple of dozen nodes that can do things here on the left side, but it's not in the scope of this tutorial. If you look at tutorials for version 1, search for Klaus and Gaea in YouTube. He has extremely good ones. So we do a very simple one. We still have our mountain here. Maybe let's combine it only with a canyon. So I want to have a canyon in the mountain. And then I have these two nodes I want to combine them. So I drag and drop, say combine. And here in the combine node, I can actually input the two of them. And then you will see that I still have the mountain, but now the mountain is really kind of combined, blended in with this canyon information in the middle. And the combine node itself allows you to define how much everything is blended and different modes really to do. That gets also very interested in the color tab, where I use that combine node quite a lot. Then add a bit of erosion to it, and you already have a very realistic landscape that you can use for whatever things. And still important, these three nodes stay exactly the same because they are producing the output of the lithosphere that you can then grab in the next thing. The hydrosphere, as I said, is everything water, and it's quite important because the hydrosphere will import the lithosphere and then will modify it, because water naturally carves mountains, for example, so it will change it. Hydro meaning snow, rivers, lakes, and there's also a sea node that I did not use here. You can also add that for kind of simulating the sea. Other than that, if you click on it, you see you have different water-based things that you can do here. You can, of course, modify the properties of each node, like the snow line should be very deep, very high, or none at all. And whatever you do at the end, you will have these outputs here for the hydrosphere and all these exports. The exports are important because we want to have these heightmaps, of course, in Unreal, for example, saying everything black is no snow and everything white is a snow material, something like that. Same goes for rivers and lakes and so on and so on. All these things have export nodes that we actually use and actively export into maps, and we will then use these masks in procedural content generation, for example, putting pebbles into a river, nowhere else. Right-click export or F3 will export every node that you see into a map. Okay, so we started with lithosphere, we end up with hydrosphere output, and this is then something we would use in the next tab. Depending what you want to do, the hydrosphere output would be your final output for Unreal, for example. You would then actually import it here and then add a lot of different export nodes that are predefined in the data section of the environment, like the curvature, like the flow, like rock maps, like protrusions and stuff like that. So all these different things will get you different masks with information that you can use to either color your things, put a different material on it, a different material layer in your landscape on it, or to spawn whatever you need in PCG. And that is why it's, at the end of the day, it looks so realistic, because you get these very, very detailed maps that are much more detailed than just using an auto material and just defining the slope. We still can define the slope here, but we have, of course, 20 other things that are coming out of the box, and we can combine them, combining the mask and so, to get a kind of unlimited amount of information that we want to extract from the graph here that we have. At the moment we are happy, we can export the whole thing. You see everything that is marked for export will receive this small entry for exporting it as PNG, for example. EXR and PNG are the two formats that Unreal will accept, and we come later to that one. So hydrosphere exporting everything, that is the standard process that you would do in Unreal. If you say, okay, I also want to color that, for example, in Blender, I have the option to also use this Biosphere thing. Biosphere has one peculiarity: it adds geometry to the whole geometry that you have. So the whole things like small trees and so are kind of simulated with some kind of primitive materials here. So it will change your landscape. That is fine for Blender or for Gaea here to really kind of color it and make it look nice. It's not so fine for Unreal, because in Unreal, of course, I want to import a real tree model and not just a kind of geometry. Yeah, that is kind of, nearly something like a tree, but not really if you look a bit deeper. So let's change it here back, going away from the canyon, because I told them to have only trees on the high mountains, and we don't have one with the canyon. Here it looks better. So we have two things here. The one is scrubs, that is small stuff, and then we have conifers. These are the bigger trees, and you can, of course, define exactly where they want to go. You can mask them with different export nodes. You can say seek water or not. If you don't see them enough, they are only visible 2K and above, so you would have to really switch to 2K or 4K. That takes a while to render it, but then you will see these small simulated nodes, if you say, and they are much more realistic, at least from a bit farther away. Not really if you really drill down into it, then you see it's not really a tree. But yeah, looking at it from the far side makes it much more realistic, even if the size is not really fitting, I guess. Okay, so adding these geometry nodes, of course, is something, as I said, we only want to have, for example, in Blender or coloring here, not in Unreal. So there, be careful what you export and what you import then where, because that is now your final geometry. Good. These are the vegetation things. And again, having this vegetation set, we can color it, and we can, of course, output it if you want to have it in Blender. That's the next video. But here for the moment, we just leave it as it is. We just want to color it. And that means we will import here in the color tab the import bio out. That includes these trees. If we don't want them, we would here have the hydro out. First thing is we add this texture here. That is something that we can add color to. So that is the kind of base texture for our landscape. And then the process is quite always the same. For every layer that we want to add, we add a color, either a solid color or a set map, so a satellite map with different colors on it, and combine it more and more. The whole thing is always masked. So I start with the big mask where a lot of landscape is covered, like soil, for example, and then I go more and more fine-grained, always filtering it down, so that I start with a big one and I keep adding details with smaller and smaller detail masks. So here we started with this soil that is kind of very generic, kind of rock-looking things. And then, for example, I want to add, but the peaks, they should actually not be this rock-looking. They should be like granite, for example, so they should be gray. And you see, at the moment I apply that from the former kind of sandy thing, it's only adjusting the peaks, simply because I mask it down only to go for the peaks. Here's the shoreline. So the shoreline comes from the water tab, and we say, okay, only the shoreline should have this sandy brown. Same goes for flow or for water. Then we want to really color our conifers. These are the trees. Sometimes it's not really sure what kind of geometry it should use. You see the geometry is missing. It colors something, but without the right geometry. Just then you go back and go to the last geometry you want to use and press G to put it as an underlay, and then it really should switch back to the right geometry. Now you see these small triangles that are representing our trees here. Then we have our small scrubs. I told them to seek the water, so it's along the river. And at the end, we could add the snow. That is already it. So meaning we modify the geometry. Everything else is kind of pre-computed. You, of course, should go through the nodes thinking about what parts do you want to color. Are there different maps you want to use, different filters you want to use, and then you have your results. Quite easy as that. And the only thing that you actually have to modify is at the beginning the geometry. We did it here. I just used another seed. That's kind of a volcanic looking thing, looks very good. And if I then go back to our snow, the very last node for the texture that we have, it takes a while depending on your resolution here. I have 4K here, and you see same thing happens. Everything is colored, everything is already there, and already possible to export that, for example, to Blender to build a very nice 3D map, and then we have the same result. Last thing that we have to do, we have to export the whole thing. You set a path here, you start building. In our case here, depending on your resolution that you choose, it will warn you to have some watermark in it. No, we don't want that. I have here the indie version until 4K. I choose 8K. You have here the Unreal exports that Unreal is recommending. Let's do it for 1K, for example. And you can actually use 1K easily. You can always upscale that in a program, but normally you don't need it, simply because the details are added in the procedural content generation, not necessarily here in the Gaea maps. Result is something like that. So a folder with a lot of different masks, grayscale masks, a couple of colored things like the cartography. Looks like a map actually. Then of course the final texture. Also I can export a mesh if I want, so that is something in FBX that I directly can import into Unreal, and it's incredibly huge. But with Nanite, for example, it's absolutely no problem to already use that if you want, but we will actually use a landscape material. That is more the traditional way, let's say. Here is our final texture map. We will definitely use that in Blender, and you see all the other things are kind of grayscales that show you where to place things and where not. For example, for the flow, for example, for the height, for example, for things like water, for example. Result will be something like that, yeah? So we have our fully blown mountains, we have a lot of exports, and that's what we are looking for. We want to have these many, many detail maps where does something happens, like the pebbles are in the river and the conifers are on the mountains and the snow is on the top. And exactly this we will feed to Unreal to either modify and select the material layer that we want to have in our landscape material, or to spawn things like pebbles in the river. Okay, so that's that for today. Next step obviously is to go to Blender and build a 3D map. We'll publish that soon. I hope as always that helps, and see you soon. Bye.